The material that you're about to listen to and engage with came from our 2017 Missiology Lectures, when myself, along with my colleague Johnny Ramirez-Johnson, said we need to do this next 2017 Missiology Lectures on this topic of race, theology, and mission. And we invited Dr. Love Seacrest to engage with us in that process. We wanted to explore the challenging questions regarding racism and ethnocentrism and xenophobia and all of those issues from the perspective of world Christianity with regard to how these realities have existed in many parts of the world, and also as part of the colonial mission endeavors.
It is fascinating to think that the realities we were talking about are not the experiences of one individual or even one society. We're talking about whiteness as a way of defining the world. And the conference presenters address time and again this epistemology, this way of making meaning. It has also been described as colonization and post-colonization. The question is not about guilt, it's about engagement. It's about what are we going to do with what we have inherited. So the fact that we're having the conversation should not point a finger at you as a listener or viewer.
But these are hard conversations. The conversation about race is one that has been deferred for so long and so often, over and over again. As soon as we get close to having a meaningful conversation about race, we recoil from the pain of it. And so in our lectures, you'll see some of that pain emerge. You'll see some people who have long experienced racism express and declare and name experiences that they have had that have been deeply formative, deformative even. So this conversation is not a pretty one, but we're having it.
As observers, as listeners, you will be engaging, and we invite you to invite the Holy Spirit. The three of us pray a lot about this series. We humbly submitted to God and pleaded for God's mercy to lead us. We are feeble, and combined, we are imperfect, and we have prayed that the Lord will fill the gaps. And the conversation is only a starter. It is in your hands. It is in your community. It is in your family. And most importantly, it is on your knees.
First, I want to thank the organizers of this conference and also for those behind the scenes who've put this together. It's definitely been not just a timely conversation, but one that has been long, probably needed a long time back. In particular, I'd like to thank Dr. Seacrest for being the first professor who actually held me accountable as a practitioner to develop a deeper theological foundation to engage with race and mission. It's really her challenge and her encouragement that presses me to minister with thorough integrity, humility, and creativity. So thank you, Dr. Seacrest. And to be really honest, I'm pretty intimidated to reflect on scholars whose work continue to impact my life and ministry in really deep and profound ways. I happen to be a practitioner who kind of runs around two realms, and those realms are the world of the church and of academia. So I work with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship's graduate and faculty ministries, which means that we're constantly thinking about ideas, and I'm working with faculty. And so this place of ideas and world and practical reality is just where I am. And I say this also as a disclaimer because I know that in any attempt to reflect on what we have been taught or what has been taught will be grossly oversimplified. So for that, I want to apologize to those who have presented. for conflating your ideas and stripping them of their nuance that you have put in with your blood, sweat, and tears. And so I'm really, really sorry for that. I will try to go back and read your footnotes later. But for right now, I'm just going to make really broad, sweeping generalizations for the sake of application. So forgive me, and thank you for allowing me to do so. So with that caveat, it seems to me, as I've reflected on the past couple days, that in response to the missiology lectures of race, theology, and mission, it's really a response to what we've named, or the many faces that we've named as whiteness. So that's been kind of the elephant in the room that we've been talking about. And I also see that we've actually had many interchangeable terms for whiteness. So what I've heard is that these terms include colonial power, economic greed, selective history, violence, militarization, nationalism, and centralized power and control. And so this is kind of where some of my reflections will come from. As a minister, these connections are significant because I know all too well how trendy it seems to engage in issues of race and racism in the church or even outside of the church. That's just the catchphrase that we're about. I mean, if we think about it, I know a lot more people who are willing to follow people who are woke on Twitter than if you're not, right? That's just it. And while we're mentioning the Twitter world, I also know that it's much easier to tweet something that we heard at a conference than to practice it over the long haul. To put it another way, I know all too well also what it's like to go to a conference and return from it only to find myself settling into the rhythms of life and routine that I know, that are comfortable and that just are the way they are to survive. So knowing this, I found myself returning to two really simple questions as I reflect on the past couple days. They're simple questions I hope will ground my personal reflections moving forward and thinking about how it impacts the ground. And I just also want to offer to you, some of these questions come back to me because one of the pieces I noticed as I think about the world and the church, academia, society, is that I know that sometimes there's more of a critique on the methodology that we use in practice that actually end up aligning with the things that we're speaking out against or hoping to stand out against. And that our character and our integrity, perhaps as people in ministry, I'll speak for myself, maybe I'm the only one in the room, might be indicted as a part of, we seek for a different end goal than the ways in which we're going about it. And so I'm just gonna offer two really simple questions that I think for me will just push me to respond. So the first question is this, is how do I locate myself appropriately? So more specifically, how do I locate myself as a second generation Cantonese-speaking Chinese American woman in this conversation? And I find myself starting with this question, not as a nod towards Western individualism, but as a reiteration of Dr. Jennings' question that he posed last night of who am I, in this strange new place. As a woman of color, others are really quick to offer a response to that question for me, but I have to come to terms with my response to that question in light of the marriage between salvation, greed, and power. And in the context of the US, I often find myself left to consider if situating myself appropriately means honoring my story as normative in a land that disembodies my story by using it whenever it can be used to be a tool for economic prosperity and political power. I wonder for myself if it means my complicity with oppression Olympics, especially amongst communities of color, by allowing my narrative to be added only if it serves to benefit others. And it's difficult to consider what it means, who I am in this land, where my history is evoked only when it serves a purpose. So perhaps to consider who I am in this land is to come to terms with the pain of being a tool for achievement and power. And I wonder if perhaps pursuing a holistic identity is resistance against the allure of the victim mentality that perpetuates the cycle of violence and the violence of power and money. You see, these lectures challenge me to locate myself. And in order to think about practice, I have to locate myself. They challenge me to consider how I'm situated also beyond the US. On occasion, I hear the challenge to consider our tendency to do overseas missions, and then we never think about what's happening in our backyard. But I also maybe want to pose the other direction as well. In these past few days, I think the challenge is for me to consider if a proficiency in the US context alone and the dynamics of race and proficiency just in the US also perpetuates the expansive reach of colonial power and nationalism. In other words, I'm challenged to consider the ways in which the systems perpetuating violence, greed, and control in the US are the same systems impacting international policies and governments around the world. And maybe to put it really bluntly, if I'm only able to talk about race in terms of the US, then I'm underestimating the power of economic greed and military control. Or if I'm only able to situate myself within the US, then I have believed and bought into the lies of the US's salvific role in the world for the sake of Jesus. And more specifically for me as a university minister, I must simultaneously consider how fluent I am in engaging issues of money and power with communities of color, students of color, and also international students. It's only in listening well to the pain of those well acquainted with the underside of the empires that I'm able to locate myself appropriately. You see, I think there's a difference maybe between thinking I'm self-aware versus actually being self-aware to other people. And so my second question that I'm mulling over is, how do we locate our ministries? That's the practical piece, I guess, or maybe moving to our communal identities. A large disadvantage of being a minister from the US is that the foundation of this nation was built on this fusion of Christianity with economic greed and political power. That's something we've been talking about. Separation of church and state has often functioned only to perpetuate political strategies masked in so-called Christian theology. So the task of situating our ministries then is complicated and requires careful examination. So I wonder if situating our ministry means doing the hard work of confessing the ways in which our ministry visions and purpose statements align a little bit too much with the visions of capitalistic principles and meritocracy. I wonder if it means considering how we would actually define successful ministry without the Bible verses or the spiritual language. When Jesus' language is stripped away, are we left with conquest strategies? Or are we left with a fresh imagination of God's life and breath in the world? I should end by saying that though these questions are compelling, I'm really fearful of the cost. It's really scary. I'm fearful because it's clear that disrupting the principalities at work and societal forces means it never ended well for anyone. So sometimes I wonder if we're praised for our ministry's success, could that be a litmus test for our complicity with the empire? Thank you.
Thank you.